mentioned before, the president made his first trip to the storm zone today, and in times of crisis, it's always people first. But inevitably, partisan politics will usually bubble to the surface. My guest tonight knows a little bit about politics. He headed up research and digital strategy for the Ted Cruz presidential campaign last year. He's now CEO of WPA Intelligence, and this is Chris Wilson, who's in Austin tonight. Hey, Chris, good evening.
Hey, good evening.
You're down in Austin right now. Give us a sense, first of all, I know this is what the subject is, but how are things in Austin?
Well, things are here from a weather standpoint. Fine. It's actually fairly nice for Austin this time of year. It is, but there's from an environmental and attitude standpoint, I think there's a lot of concern. It's very solemn. There's a lot of people have friends and family who live in Houston, and so because of that, there is a lot of checking of the news, checking of Twitter, checking of video on Snapchat to see what's going on, and trying to stay in touch with loved ones. So there's a lot of concern for people's safety right now, and I think that is obviously affecting everyone's attitude.
I believe it. So we saw the president down in Corpus Christi today. Let's talk about in times of crisis. We remember the pictures of President Bush flying over New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. We saw President Obama near Sandy. We saw the president today down in Corpus Christi. Granted, not the storm zone, but it was still important for him to be there.
It was. I think it's really just being on the spot matters a lot. I mean, George W. Bush found that out the hard way, is that no matter what, you need to go where people need you. And I think you've seen that sort of leadership coming out of the leadership here in the state, from Governor Abbott to Senator Cruz to Senator Cornyn. They've all been on site. Senator Cruz, of course, living in Houston. Governor Abbott immediately going down there and doing everything he could to make sure that all the resources are met, because what people are looking for at this time right now is safety. And there is still substantial danger. This is not over. There's still rain falling in some places. And so people look to their leaders to make sure that they're taken care of, they're protected. And there are people who are still worried about having to climb onto the rooftop and get out. And it is just a remarkable situation where you look at the coming together of that Texas spirit, where the pictures and the shots coming out of that Houston area, where there are boats going in and picking people up. I mean, it's almost heartwarming in a sense, and I think it shows what the best part of America is. It's represented right here in the state of Texas.
Yeah, I think at times like this, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever. I mean, it's people over politics. But you've been around long enough to know that people are going to find some sort of political tack in anything, and one good example that came to the surface today was the fact that people are saying, okay, back during Sandy, Ted Cruz, John Cornyn voted against the Sandy bailout bill, but it seems like, it's not an apples to oranges comparison here.
No, far from it. I mean, if you look at some of the things that were contained in that bill, it was literally 2/3 pork. That is not half, not a third, but 2/3 of it was used as a vehicle for a lot of opportunistic politicians to do nothing more but try and put a bunch of funding into it for areas and for projects that had literally nothing to do with Hurricane Sandy. And that's what I talked about safety. I mean, one of the next things that's going to come along is stability and rebuilding. And whatever the federal government, whatever role that Republicans and Democrats may disagree on, one that we can all agree on is that the federal government is there for times like this, when people need the help that can only be provided by a government entity, like it was the case in Sandy or was the case now here. Is that hopefully we will see the kind of leadership come from our Texas representatives that will make sure that it is a bill that is only driven for relief from the hurricane. And that, I think, will be where the rubber meets the road in terms of leadership coming out of the state.
When you're talking about the government stepping in to help, it reminds me of the old quote from Ronald Reagan, I'm here from the federal government, and I'm here to help. And he said that's the scariest thing to hear. But you're absolutely right, because, not every private enterprise can step in and do what the government can when it comes to these massive recovery efforts.
Yeah, not in this situation, because what's going to go on down in Houston is going to be pretty remarkable all right, you've got to get people to stability. You've got to get them to go through a whole rebuilding process. And that's something where, from an infrastructure standpoint, that is clearly the role of the federal government. And so from that, but it's not the role of the federal government to go start putting on funding for the Smithsonian Institution or for local pet projects.
Weather planes and things like that.
Exactly. I mean, there was a great piece today, and I think it was the Washington Examiner, where it listed out all the different projects that were thrown onto that Sandy bill, where literally 2/3 of it had nothing at all to do with Hurricane Sandy relief. And that is, I'd like to believe that the leadership that exists right now in Congress can prevent that sort of atrocity from happening. Because if it does, I think you'd find representatives of Texas voting against it, because they are, if you're going to take a stand against pork, Well, the old saying is pork is pork no matter whose trough it is, it's in. And so making sure that it's something that is only targeted toward relief for this area. And that's really what's important.
All right. Chris Wilson, I appreciate you staying up with us tonight. Good perspective, and stay safe down there, and we'll see you back in D.C. soon enough.
That sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Chris Wilson, we're back after this on The Final Five.